Good evening, all, and welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we journey into the frozen heart of Alberta, through forgotten corners and isolated small towns where endless wilderness stretches for miles and places exist where help does not reach. Here, 7 of the most disturbing, real, and terrifying true horror stories have emerged, accounts that still haunt those who survived them. These are not legends or campfire tales. These are real, documented encounters from ordinary people, forever changed by what they witnessed. From abandoned farmhouses to creatures that should not exist. From basements hiding secrets to disappearances that defy explanation. Tonight, you will hear horrors that refuse to stay buried. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Fears for daily true horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let us step into the shadows of Alberta, where civilization ends and terror begins. My name is Ethan Caldwell, and this happened when I was 26. During the winter, I moved to a small Alberta town called Blackridge. I didn't go there chasing adventure or mystery. I went because I needed work, silence, and distance. From my family, from a failed engagement, and from a city that felt like it was slowly suffocating me. Blackridge promised all of that. Too much of it, as it turned out. The town sat like a forgotten scar on the map, surrounded by dense spruce forest and miles of frozen backroads. The locals were polite, but guarded. Smiles without warmth, conversations that ended just as they became interesting. I worked night shifts maintaining power lines for a regional utility company, which meant long hours alone in the dark, listening to the wind scrape across frozen metal. The first week, I noticed something strange. Every night at exactly 2:17 a.m., the lights on the far edge of town would flicker, not go out, not surge, just pulse once, like a slow blink. I asked my supervisor about it. He stared at me for a long moment before saying, "If you see lights where there shouldn't be any, don't follow them." I laughed then. I wouldn't later. A few nights later, the flicker happened again. 2:17 a.m. Exactly. I was parked near the Northern Service Road, engine idling, heater barely keeping the cold from biting through my gloves. This time, though, something was different. The lights didn't just pulse. They dimmed, slowly, like something was breathing through the electrical grid. Then I saw it. Beyond the last row of houses, past where the road turned into nothing but packed snow and trees, there was another light. Not a street lamp, not a farmhouse. It hovered low, pale yellow, swaying gently between the trunks, like it was being carried by someone walking just out of sight. I told myself it was a reflection, fatigue, ice on my windshield. But when I killed the engine, the light moved closer. My radio crackled, not static, whispering. Soft, layered voices, overlapping each other, all speaking too quietly to understand. I grabbed the mic and called dispatch. No response. Just the whispers, growing clearer, like they were learning how to use sound. That's when I noticed the forest had gone completely still. No wind, no animals. Even my own breathing sounded wrong. Too loud, too slow. The light stopped at the tree line and waited. I couldn't move. My hands were frozen to the steering wheel, and every instinct screamed at me to leave. But the light, it was watching. Not with eyes, I don't think. It didn't have a shape yet. But with an awareness that pressed into my chest like a weight. My phone was dead. My radio crackled with those whispers, and the heater sputtered into silence. I felt completely isolated, as if the world beyond that tree line had stopped existing. Then I saw movement. Shadows, thin and long, stretching unnaturally between the trees, inching toward me. They didn't rustle leaves. They didn't make noise. They simply appeared closer with each heartbeat. My rational mind screamed for explanation, but my body refused to comply. I threw the truck into reverse, tires grinding against icy gravel. But the shadows mirrored me, moving faster than any human could. By the time I reached the edge of the clearing, the hovering light shot straight into the sky, dissolving like it had never been there. But the whispers didn't stop. They followed me back to my cabin. Every night after that, I could hear faint whispers through the walls, always starting at 2:17 a.m. The following days were restless. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus, and every local I asked about the lights avoided eye contact. One old man muttered, "They've been watching since the town began. Don't look for answers." I tried to shrug it off. Rational explanations, military drones, faulty power grids, hallucinations were what kept me sane. But every night, 2:17 a.m. came with its ritual. One night, I followed the road beyond the tree line. Snow crunched beneath my boots. The forest was silent. And then I saw tracks. Not animal, not human, but something in between. They were circular, wide, and impossibly deep. They led straight to a clearing where the snow was melted, leaving black, oily soil. At the center, the light appeared again, low and swaying. My stomach turned to ice. I tried to retreat, but the whispers called my name, low and urgent, like they knew my thoughts. I realized then that the lights weren't just observing. They were testing me, learning me, deciding how far I could go before I became part of them. The forest seemed alive, watching, breathing, waiting. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it. I stopped following the lights. I stayed inside my cabin, doors locked, heater on, curtains drawn. But Black Ridge doesn't let you hide from things like this. The lights started appearing in my windows, drifting along the frost like they were slipping through the glass. Sometimes I'd see them in reflections in the fridge, in the darkened TV screen, even on my ceiling while I lay awake. They didn't move like anything I recognized. They floated, they pulsed, they judged. One night, desperate for answers, I drove to the town library. The old archives smelled of dust and mold, but I found something chilling. Reports from decades ago of missing residents, sudden disappearances, and flickering lights in the forests, just like the ones I saw. The names on the pages were real, familiar. Some lived in the houses that still stood today. There were sketches, hand-drawn maps, warnings scribbled in margins. Do not follow. They take the curious. When I left the library, the sun had gone down. The air was still. And across the frozen main street, I saw the light hovering above the water tower, closer than ever before, like it had been waiting for me. I couldn't escape it. That night, the whispers started again, but now they were inside my head. At first, faint murmurs, teasing words. Then they became coherent, almost conversational. Come, step into the dark, join us. My hands shook as I tried to write it down, but my pen wouldn't move. My reflection in the mirror stared back at me with eyes that weren't mine for a fraction of a second. Driven by a mix of fear and obsession, I returned to the forest, following the light that hovered just beyond the tree line. Each step felt heavier than the last, like wading through water made of ice. The tracks reappeared, deeper and wider than before, almost welcoming me. My flashlight flickered, and the whispers crescendoed into a chaotic harmony of voices, repeating my name, laughing in a way that hurt my ears. Then I saw them. Figures between the trees, almost transparent, like smoke shaped into men and women, reaching toward the light. They moved with purpose, dragging something unseen behind them. And as I stepped closer, I realized the light was not a light at all. It was the forest itself, alive, hungry, and waiting for me. My heart was pounding, but something kept me rooted to the spot. Fear, yes, but also a strange compulsion, like the forest had reached into my mind and refused to let go. The hovering light began to expand, stretching upward, illuminating the snow in a sickly, pale glow. The shadowy figures twisted, growing taller, their forms more distorted. Some had elongated limbs, some had no faces at all. And yet, they moved with intent, as though each step carried centuries of purpose. I wanted to scream, I wanted to run, but my legs refused. The whispers weren't just voices anymore, they were memories, flickering images in my mind of people who had vanished from Black Ridge over decades. Faces I had seen in town, smiles frozen in time, now staring at me, pleading, warning, accusing. The cold gnawed at my skin, but the real chill came from understanding that these lights, these figures, were not just haunting me. They were feeding off the town itself, and I was now part of their hunt. I fell backward, snow crunching under me, and the light suddenly darted closer, like a predator testing its prey. Panic surged. I grabbed my flashlight, pointed it at the brightest shadow, and I saw its face, or rather, the absence of one. The closest shadow's head split like glass, revealing a dark void that seemed to absorb light itself. My flashlight flickered and died. I was surrounded by whispers now, overlapping, shrill, pleading, commanding, all at once. I scrambled backward, tripping over roots and snow, but the figures didn't pursue in the way I expected. They watched. They circled, silent but aware, as if my fear was enough to feed them for now. I thought I could outrun the forest. I could not. Each step back toward town felt like moving through water, though the snow was frozen solid. And then the hovering lights split, hundreds of tiny sparks, scattering like fireflies, slipping between the trees, reaching toward my cabin in town. I realized then that the forest wasn't just in the trees, it was everywhere. Every shadow, every corner of Black Ridge was now connected to that pulsing, hungry presence. By the time I returned to my cabin, dawn was breaking, pale and weak. The whispers had stopped, but the light lingered in my mind. Every time I blinked, I saw the faint glow between trees. Every time I slept, the shadows were there, waiting for 2:17 a.m. again. The following night, I barely slept. Every second dragged until 2:17 a.m. And then it happened. The whispers returned, softer this time, almost coaxing. My windows rattled. The temperature inside the cabin dropped to bone-freezing levels. And through the frost, I saw tiny sparks moving like insects in the darkness. I wanted to hide under blankets, to pretend it wasn't real, but instinct forced me outside. As I stepped onto the porch, the snow beneath my boots seemed to pulse, mirroring my heartbeat. The lights weren't far this time. They hovered just beyond the tree line, stationary yet alive, waiting for me. Shadows emerged again, faceless, stretching impossibly tall, some dissolving into mist before reappearing elsewhere. And then the whispers changed. They began screaming, not in sound, but in emotion. Panic, regret, despair, all transmitted directly into my mind, leaving me reeling. I realized something terrifying. The forest wasn't bound by time or space. It didn't just consume bodies. It consumed memory, fear, and soul. I stumbled backward, sliding across the icy ground, and for the first time, I understood the warnings in the library. Those who followed the lights never returned whole. I never went back into the forest. I left Black Ridge the next morning, leaving my cabin, my truck, and most of my belongings behind. But the lights followed me in memory, and in ways I still cannot explain. Even now, I see them in reflections, in the corner of my vision, hovering just beyond recognition. The whispers return sometimes when I'm alone, especially at night. Always the same time, 2:17 a.m. Friends tell me I imagined it. They think I left town because I couldn't handle the isolation, the cold, or stress. But I know the truth. The lights, the shadows, the whispers, they were waiting for me. And I am certain that one day, if I ever return, they will be there, ready to claim what I left behind. Black Ridge isn't just a town. It's a living entity, and those who wander too close are never fully human again. I tell this story now because I cannot let anyone else follow the lights. Stay away from the northern tree line. Don't drive past 2:17 a.m. And whatever you do, do not blink at the forest because the lights will notice. My name is Clara Jennings, and this happened during the harsh winter of 2019, when I had just moved back to my hometown of Red Cliff, Alberta. I thought returning would be comforting, a chance to reconnect with old friends and the quiet pace of rural life. But nothing about that winter was ordinary. I had rented an old farmhouse on the outskirts of town, cheap and isolated, with its paint peeling and shutters hanging crooked. The previous owner had left in a hurry, leaving a note simply stating, "Do not stay after dark." I laughed at it at first. I'm not superstitious. I have a healthy skepticism about the paranormal. But the farmhouse had a presence. Doors would creak open on their own. Windows would rattle, even when the wind was still. And every night, no matter where I was in the house, I could hear soft whispers. So faint at first that I thought it was my imagination. But they grew louder with each passing night. One evening, as I sat reading by the fireplace, the whispers formed words. "You shouldn't be here. Leave now." My heart pounded. I tried to rationalize it, but deep down, I knew that whatever had inhabited this house wasn't going to let me leave easily. The first night, I tried to ignore the whispers, telling myself they were drafts, the wind through old walls. But at 3:03 a.m., I woke to the sound of footsteps upstairs. Slow, deliberate, echoing across the creaky wooden floors. My bedroom door was closed. I checked the hallway. Empty. I called out, "Hello?" But only silence answered, followed by the faintest whisper, "You're mine." The farmhouse seemed to breathe around me. The walls contracted, the shadows stretched unnaturally across the ceilings, and the fireplace flickered, sending grotesque shapes dancing along the walls. I could feel a presence in the room with me, a weight pressing against my chest, cold and heavy. My rational mind tried to anchor me. Rats, structural settling, sleep paralysis? But none of it explained the faint scratching at the bedroom door, or the whispers repeating my name, softer now, like someone kneeling just outside the frame of vision. By the time dawn came, I hadn't slept. Every shadow, every corner, felt alive. I realized then that the farmhouse wasn't empty. It had a memory, a hunger, and it was aware of me. I would never enter the basement again. But the basement seemed aware of that decision too. The next evening, I forced myself to stay calm. I lit every lamp in the house, locked every door, and told myself I would ignore whatever it was. That plan lasted until I heard a whisper come from the kitchen sink. "Turn around, now." My skin crawled. I slowly lifted my head and saw the shadow of a figure reflected in the darkened window. tall, thin, faceless, and hovering slightly above the floor. I spun around, but nothing was there. Then the whispers grew louder, echoing through the walls and the floors like they were coming from inside the house itself. I could feel the floorboards vibrating beneath my feet, as if the house was trying to communicate in some ancient mechanical language. I grabbed my jacket and flashlight, intent on leaving, but the front door wouldn't budge. It was as if the house itself had decided I couldn't leave. I finally noticed the faint scratches along the walls. Not random. Symbols, almost like letters, carved into the old paint, glowing faintly in the lamplight. The whispers coalesced into a single word, repeated over and over. Stay, stay, stay. My rational mind shattered. Something wanted me to remain, and I was powerless to resist its pull. By the third night, sleep had become impossible. I started to notice other things moving on their own. Chairs slightly shifted, a kettle dripping even when empty, the wind whistling through sealed windows. Every corner of the house seemed alive, pressing in on me, whispering. I could no longer tell if the noises were in my head or real. At 2:45 a.m., the basement door creaked open by itself. I had avoided that basement since moving in, but something about the sound forced me to look. The stairs were pitch black, yet I could see faint glowing eyes at the bottom, reflecting a light that wasn't there. The whispers came from the basement now, louder, clearer. We see you. You cannot leave. We hunger. Panic clawed at me, but I felt compelled to watch. Slowly, the figure from the window appeared at the top of the stairs, motionless, faceless, waiting. My flashlight flickered and illuminated dozens of smaller shadows emerging from the corners of the room, writhing and stretching toward the staircase. The air turned cold, dense, and heavy, like a living curtain pressing against my chest. I realized in that instant that the farmhouse wasn't just haunted, it was alive, and it wanted me inside. I tried to rationalize, telling myself I had reached the limits of exhaustion, that my imagination was creating the horrors. But the house didn't care about reason. That night, I went to bed early, hoping the darkness would pass without incident. It did not. Around 3:15 a.m., I awoke to the sound of footsteps across the ceiling above me, slow and deliberate, moving from one end of the house to the other. The whispers returned, layered and insistent. Come down, join us. I forced myself out of bed, trying to ignore the fear pounding in my chest. But as I approached the hallway, the air thickened, like wading through invisible water, making each step a struggle. Shadows coalesced along the walls, moving independently of the dim light, writhing and stretching unnaturally. The scratching symbols on the walls now seemed to pulse, glowing brighter with each whisper, forming words I could not understand, but instinctively feared. By the time I reached the bottom of the stairs, the basement door had slammed open on its own. A dark mass waited, undefined, but full of intent. I felt eyes on me from every corner of the house, watching, judging, deciding my fate. For the first time, I understood that leaving might not be an option, not unless the house permitted it. Compelled by a mix of terror and fascination, I edged closer to the basement, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The mass shifted slightly, as if alive, and the whispers sharpened into words I could barely comprehend. You belong here. Forever. I shivered, realizing the house was not just haunted, it was sentient, and it had claimed me as prey. The floorboards groaned beneath me, yet I felt no real weight. The house seemed to buoy me forward, as if I were being drawn into the basement by some invisible current. From the shadows emerged faint forms, faces, faceless heads, torsos bending in unnatural angles, all staring at me with eyes that burned cold into my mind. I tried to back away, but the hallway elongated, stretching impossibly, making the exit disappear from sight. For hours, I stood there, caught between fear and paralyzing awe. Then, as suddenly as it began, the whispers faded, the shadows retreated, and the basement door slammed shut behind me. I was alone, at least for now. But I knew the farmhouse was patient. It would wait. And when it called again, I would be forced to answer. The next night, I didn't sleep at all. Every creak, every groan of the old farmhouse felt deliberate, as if the building itself was testing me, reminding me I was trapped within its memory. Around 2:50 a.m., I heard a low humming coming from the walls, deep, resonant, almost musical, but wrong in ways I couldn't identify. It vibrated through my bones, making my teeth chatter. The whispers joined in, now synchronized with the hum. Do not leave. Do not escape. Stay. Forever. I tried to leave. Tried to flee to my car, but the front door wouldn't open. The shadows in the corners of every room stretched impossibly toward me, curling along the walls like smoke, following me wherever I stepped. Even the furniture seemed alive, shifting subtly, preventing escape. The basement door creaked again, whispering, "We see you. Step closer. Join us." Something inside me broke. I realized the farmhouse wasn't just haunted by spirits, it was hungry. It wanted my attention, my fear, my essence. I couldn't tell where the house ended and the shadows began. I could only feel the pressure, the pulling, the insistence. And I knew that if I gave in, I would never leave. By morning, I was shaking. But I forced myself to explore the house, trying to find a rational explanation. That's when I noticed it. The walls were changing. Symbols I hadn't seen before had appeared overnight, etched deep into the plaster, glowing faintly. Marks forming shapes I could barely comprehend, almost like a language I instinctively feared. The air was heavier, darker, as if the house had drawn the night into itself. I checked the basement. The door was now fully open, inviting, the stairs slick with condensation that wasn't there before. A faint yellow glow pulsed from below, like a heartbeat accompanied by whispers layered with desperate cries, some screaming, some laughing. I could feel the weight of every missing person from Redcliffe pressing into the room, their fear coalescing into a living force. I stumbled backward, my mind racing. I could feel the farmhouse watching me, waiting for me to falter. Every window, every corner, every shadow was alive. I understood then that the house had memory, will, and hunger. And my presence, no matter how brief, had become part of its dark design. That night, I knew I could no longer pretend. The whispers returned, louder than ever, flowing through the walls and floors like a river of voices. Come, come, join us. They called my name repeatedly, stretching it into something grotesque and inhuman. I couldn't ignore them. My hands shook as I gripped the flashlight, and I could feel the house itself pulsing beneath my feet, alive with a presence I couldn't escape. I approached the basement once more, compelled by a mix of fear and fascination. The yellow glow was stronger, almost hypnotic, illuminating shapes in the shadows that I had never seen before. Torsos bending in impossible angles, faces half-formed, screaming silently. The symbols on the walls seemed to writhe, growing longer, more intricate, their meaning unfathomable but threatening. I realized with terror that the house wasn't just haunted. It consumed time, memory, and sanity, reshaping the world around it to trap those who lingered. I wanted to flee, but my body refused. The whispers now penetrated my thoughts directly, pulling me forward, forcing me toward the basement stairs. Every instinct screamed to run. Yet my mind was paralyzed, ensnared in the house's will. It had decided my fate, and I was powerless. I left Redcliffe the next morning. I abandoned the farmhouse, my belongings, and the sense of home I had hoped to regain. But even now, years later, I still hear whispers when the house is quiet, when the wind moves just right. I see the faint glow of the basement light in reflections in the corners of my vision, and it never fails to make my stomach turn. Friends and family dismissed my story. "Old house, imagination," they said. But I know better. The whispering farmhouse is alive. It waits patiently, feeding on fear and curiosity, remembering all who enter its walls. I can still hear the faintest scratching, like nails across plaster, and I know it remembers me. Some nights, I dream of those glowing symbols and the faceless shapes, and I wake in a sweat, knowing that one day, the house will call me back. Do not be curious about abandoned homes. Do not follow the whispers. And if you ever see that faint yellow glow behind a darkened window, run, because the house will remember, and it will wait. My name is Derek Thompson, and this happened in the winter of 2020 when I was driving across northern Alberta on Highway 63, returning from a late-night delivery job. The road was empty for miles, surrounded by dense, snow-covered pine forests, and the wind howled like it carried warnings. I was tired, frozen, and eager to reach a small motel in a town that didn't appear on most maps. But what I encountered on that stretch of road would haunt me forever. It started with the headlights. I thought it was another car at first, a vehicle moving too fast for the icy conditions. But there was no tail light, no engine noise, nothing. Just a pale light bouncing across the snow, moving alongside me, keeping pace no matter how fast I went. My heart raced. I slowed, trying to see it better. And then I realized it was following me. I called out, thinking someone might be stranded, or worse, a prank. No response. The air around me grew heavier, colder, like the forest itself had decided to press in on the highway. And then I saw it. A shadowy figure, standing at the side of the road, impossibly tall, faceless, watching me. My hands gripped the wheel so tight they ached. I tried to dismiss it. Exhaustion, cold, stress, it had to be an illusion. But the figure moved fluidly, staying in my peripheral vision no matter which way I turned my head. My breath fogged inside the truck, and my hands were numb. Yet I could feel the weight of its gaze like icy fingers on my shoulders. I pressed the accelerator, hoping speed would make it vanish. But the shadow matched me, gliding over the snow as if it didn't obey the laws of physics. Panic set in. I reached for my phone to call anyone, police, friends, anyone, but it had no signal. The radio squawked with static, then a faint whisper came through. "Stop, do not leave, the road belongs to us." My pulse hammered in my ears. The highway, long and desolate, suddenly felt alive, as if the snow itself was watching me. I saw movement in the trees, shapes sliding between the trunks, elongated limbs bent at impossible angles. My headlights caught glimpses of faces, pale and hollow, that didn't belong to any human. And through it all, the shadow at the roadside remained, unmoving yet undeniably present. A sentinel in the frozen night, waiting to test my courage. The road stretched endlessly before me, snow swirling in the headlights like specters dancing on ice. Every time I glanced in the rearview mirror, the shadow wasn't just there, it seemed closer, almost reaching for the truck. My hands shook uncontrollably on the wheel, and I realized the highway itself had changed. The trees no longer looked like the pines I knew. They twisted, gnarled, branches stretching like claws over the road, creating a tunnel of darkness that trapped me. Then I saw it clearly. The shadow had a shape now, humanoid but impossibly thin, limbs too long, moving with fluid precision that no human could manage. Its head tilted unnaturally, and though there was no face, I could feel its awareness, like it could see straight into my mind. My pulse spiked as it suddenly stepped onto the road. My truck skidded on ice, tires squealing, and I slammed the brakes, desperate to avoid it. I could feel the cold air shift, as if the entire forest exhaled around me. The whispers returned, louder than before, forming words in my mind. This is our highway. You cannot leave. You are ours. My survival instinct screamed to escape, but the shadow simply glided alongside me, matching every movement. It was testing me, waiting, judging. I floored the accelerator, swerving around icy patches, desperate to put distance between myself and the figure. But no matter how fast I drove, it kept pace. Sometimes I thought I lost it in the reflection of the mirrors or the curve of the road. But then it appeared again, closer than before, as if it could teleport through the snow and darkness. My vision blurred, panic making it impossible to think clearly. Then, in the trees along the side of the highway, I noticed them. Dozens of smaller shapes, crouched, pale and human-like, but wrong, moving in unnatural jerks. Their eyes glinted with a cold intelligence, reflecting the faint yellow light that seemed to emanate from the shadow itself. The whispers grew more insistent. You cannot leave. You cannot hide. The road is ours. I realized then that the highway was no longer a road. It was a corridor, a trap, and the shadow was the gatekeeper. Any attempt to escape would only lead me deeper into its control. My pulse raced, my hands bled from gripping the wheel, but my eyes were fixed on the figure ahead, slowly gliding across the ice like a predator testing its prey, daring me to fail. I tried to keep my breathing steady, but it was impossible. My eyes darted constantly between the road and the shadow gliding beside me, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Every tree seemed alive now, branches scraping the icy road like bony fingers. The smaller figures moved closer to the highway edge, watching, waiting, as if they could anticipate my every turn. Then I realized something terrifying. The shadow wasn't bound by the highway. It didn't just follow, it controlled. Whenever I tried to swerve, the truck seemed to resist, as though some invisible force was guiding it back toward the path it wanted me on. The whispers intensified in my mind. You are ours. You belong to the highway. I slammed my hands on the wheel, trying to force the truck off the road, but my tires only skidded more violently over the ice, and the shadow mirrored every motion flawlessly. I could feel my mind fraying. Each passing second stretched into minutes, the darkness pressing in. The cold was no longer external. It seeped into my bones, my blood, my thoughts. My headlights flickered, casting long, monstrous shadows across the snow. But the faceless figure stayed just beyond reach, gliding effortlessly, waiting for the moment I would falter. Desperation overtook me. I forced the truck onto the shoulder, trying to get away from the looming shadow. But it moved with perfect synchronization, staying at the same distance no matter how fast I went. I realized the shadow didn't need to walk. It flowed through the air, a presence, a predator not limited by space or distance. I passed a frozen lake, hoping the open expanse would give me freedom. But even there it followed. The smaller figures emerged from the trees, moving in eerie unison, their pale eyes glinting like broken glass in the headlights. My chest tightened with fear. I could feel my heartbeat echoing in the still night. The whispers now spoke directly into my thoughts. You cannot hide. You cannot escape. The highway feeds on fear. I tried calling out, begging for it to stop, but no sound escaped my lips. The shadow stopped in the middle of the road, unmoving, and I realized it was not waiting. It was judging. Every instinct screamed to reverse, to flee, but my body refused to obey. The highway had become a trap, and the faceless figure was the gatekeeper, deciding whether I would leave alive or at all. By now, I had stopped thinking clearly. Every shadow, every flicker of light, every whisper seemed to exist only to torment me. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, a ribbon of ice and snow that I knew would never end. The faceless figure was still there, gliding alongside, unmoving yet terrifyingly present. The smaller humanoid shapes moved closer, crouching along the roadside, their eyes following my every motion with cold, unnatural intelligence. I realized then that the highway itself had changed. Curves, I remembered, were now impossibly sharp. Stretches of road lengthened or shortened at will, as if the entire landscape had been warped by the shadow's will. I tried to keep driving, to stay in motion, but the snow seemed thicker, heavier, resisting my tires. The whispers in my mind became a chorus, overlapping voices calling my name, mocking my attempts at escape. You are ours, always ours. This is your home now. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, knowing that the shadow wasn't just a creature. It was the guardian of this frozen corridor, and I was trapped within its dominion. Every instinct told me to stop, yet the terror of what awaited if I did made me press on, every heartbeat echoing like a drum in the night. The temperature inside the truck had dropped drastically, my breath fogging in quick, desperate puffs. I dared a glance into the rearview mirror and froze. The shadow had multiplied, not physically, but in reflections. Every mirror showing a new angle, a new presence, like it existed everywhere at once. My hands shook uncontrollably. Every muscle screamed to stop the truck, to abandon it and run. But the highway stretched endlessly, leading me deeper into the frozen night. Then the whispers sharpened, forming commands I could not resist. Stop, step out, belong. My pulse pounded in my ears, and the snow outside the windshield seemed to form shapes. Faces screaming silently, elongated limbs reaching for me from the shadows. The faceless figure at the roadside slowly extended its arm, or what I imagined was an arm, and pointed directly at me. I felt an invisible pull, a force compelling me to slow, to stop, to step into the frozen highway. My mind screamed, my body resisted, yet every instinct told me I would fail. The highway had become a living entity, the shadow its sentinel, and the small humanoid shapes, its watchers. I knew one thing for certain: whoever survived this road would never be the same. By this point, my mind had entered a state of pure terror. The highway no longer felt like a road. It felt like a living trap, stretching endlessly under the weight of darkness. The faceless shadow was no longer just at the roadside. It seemed to flow alongside the truck, mirrored in every surface, present in every reflection, even in the snow that sparkled unnaturally under my headlights. The smaller humanoid figures moved in unison, their pale, elongated limbs crawling along the snow like insects, their hollow eyes fixed on me. Then I heard a voice, not through my ears, but inside my mind. You cannot leave. You will never leave. The highway is ours. My hands shook violently as I gripped the steering wheel, and the tires skidded over the ice, snow spraying in all directions. I realized the shadow wasn't just following me. It was feeding off my fear, growing stronger with every heartbeat, every frantic thought. My instinct screamed to stop, but I knew that doing so would allow it to claim me completely. Every second stretched into eternity. Every breath an agonizing reminder that the frozen night had become my prison. And the highway, the shadow's domain, would not release me alive. I do not know how long I drove before the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon. The shadow and the smaller figures seemed to fade slightly, but I could still feel their presence, lingering in the periphery of my vision, as if watching and judging my every move. My hands were numb, my heart still racing, and my mind could barely comprehend the reality I had survived. By the time I reached the outskirts of a small town, the highway seemed normal again, the twisted trees and faceless shadows gone, as if the night had been an illusion. But I knew better. The frozen highway stalker, as I call it now, doesn't disappear. It waits. It follows those who stray too far into the isolation of Alberta's northern roads, testing, hunting, and feeding on fear. Even now, when I drive through winter highways, I catch glimpses of pale figures in the snow or feel a sudden chill that reminds me the highway remembers. The shadow waits for the next traveler who thinks the road is empty, the next person foolish enough to drive alone through the night. My name is Eleanor Grant, and this happened during the winter of 2019. I was a wildlife photographer traveling through northern Alberta, searching for images of wolves in their natural habitat. One evening, I took a detour onto a forgotten dirt road, following an old map I had found in a secondhand guidebook. That's when I stumbled across an abandoned logging camp, hidden deep in the forest. The cabins were decaying, their walls warped and blackened by years of snow and rot. And a cold wind carried the scent of wet pine and something more putrid, metallic, and unnatural. Curiosity got the better of me, and I parked my truck a few meters from the main camp. As I stepped onto the snow-covered ground, the silence hit me like a weight. There was no wind, no animal, no distant sound of civilization, just the creaking of timber and the occasional drip of melting ice from the roof. I felt watched immediately, though no one was there. My camera hung heavy around my neck, but I couldn't bring myself to lift it yet. Something about the camp's dark, unnatural energy warned me to leave, but I was compelled to explore, to see what secrets it had kept hidden for decades. I approached the largest cabin, its door hanging off its hinges, and stepped inside cautiously. The floorboards groaned under my weight, echoing through the hollow space. Broken furniture lay scattered, and old tools were half buried in snow blown through the broken windows. But it wasn't the decay that unsettled me. It was the marks on the walls. Strange carvings that didn't resemble any language I knew, twisted and jagged, like claws had etched them over decades. I moved deeper into the cabin, and then I heard it. A faint whisper, so soft I thought I imagined it. Leave. Leave. My heart thumped violently, and I froze. The air inside the cabin was unnaturally cold, my breath fogging instantly, and the shadows in the corners seemed to pulse, stretching closer to me as I took each cautious step. Something moved beyond the doorway, just at the edge of my vision. I turned quickly, but the cabin appeared empty. Yet the feeling of being watched, hunted, and measured pressed down on me. Suddenly, a heavy thud came from above, like a large object dropped on the floor of the loft. My instincts screamed at me to flee. But I was trapped in both fear and fascination, unable to leave, as if the camp itself had a grip on my mind. I forced myself to climb the creaking stairs to the loft, my camera ready, heart pounding. The shadows there seemed to move independently, stretching across the walls like living tendrils. The loft was empty, except for a small pile of broken furniture and a strange wooden effigy, carved in the shape of a human figure but twisted and grotesque. Its limbs were bent at impossible angles, and its face was smooth and featureless. Yet somehow, I could feel it staring at me. As I examined it, I noticed markings etched into the floorboards around the figure. They were the same claw-like carvings from the walls, forming a circle that pulsed faintly, as if alive. The whispers returned, louder, more insistent. "You shouldn't be here. Leave before it wakes." My skin crawled, and I stumbled backward, almost tripping over debris. The loft floor groaned under the weight of some unseen presence. Suddenly, the effigy moved, or at least it seemed to. Its head tilted slowly, impossibly, and I heard the faintest scratching sound, like nails dragging across wood. I realized then that the camp was not abandoned in the usual sense. Something had been left behind, something alive, something that waited, patient and hungry. I scrambled down the stairs, desperate to escape the loft and the oppressive presence it contained. But the whispers grew louder, wrapping around my thoughts, pulling me back. I realized the camp itself was alive, or something within it was. Every floorboard creaked under invisible footsteps, and the shadows on the walls stretched toward me, fingers reaching. The door to the cabin slammed shut on its own, sending a shiver through my entire body. I tried to open it, but the handle wouldn't turn, as if the cabin had decided I could not leave yet. I glanced out the window and saw movement in the surrounding forest. Figures, tall, thin, and pale, crept between the trees, following me silently, never breaking formation. The effigy's presence seemed to expand, radiating a suffocating energy that pressed down on my chest. I understood then that the logging camp had been abandoned for a reason. Not because people left. It was because something had taken over, something that fed on intruders, on curiosity, and on fear. I had become part of its story now, a new observer trapped in a living nightmare that stretched across decades of isolation, rot, and dark intent. I forced myself to calm my breathing and search for another exit. Every step I took across the icy cabin floor seemed to echo unnaturally, bouncing off the walls as if amplified by unseen ears. The effigy in the loft felt closer, somehow present in the shadows around me, and I could feel a malicious awareness tracking my every move. I approached the side door, but the handle twisted in my grip, refusing to turn. The air inside the cabin was heavy, suffocating, and the temperature had dropped even further, frost forming on the window panes in minutes. The whispers had multiplied, layered over each other, forming a cacophony of voices that clawed at my mind. Stay, belong, forever. My pulse hammered in my temples as I realized the camp itself was reacting to my fear, feeding on it, growing stronger with every heartbeat. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch and twist, forming humanoid shapes that loomed closer with every blink. I remembered the forest outside and the figures I had glimpsed between the trees. They were waiting, watching, judging, and I knew that if I didn't escape quickly, I would be trapped here. Not just in the cabin, but in the forest, in the nightmare, forever. With shaking hands, I forced open a small side window, breaking it with a swift kick. Cold wind poured in, carrying the scent of wet pine and decay, and I clambered out onto the snow-covered ground. My boots sank into the fresh powder, and I stumbled forward, barely noticing the thick, icy fog that had suddenly rolled in from the forest. The whispers followed, no longer confined to the cabin, They echoed through the trees, overlapping with distorted, inhuman laughter. I ran, adrenaline flooding my body. But the forest had changed. Trees twisted unnaturally, forming archways and corridors that did not match the map I had followed earlier. Shadows darted between trunks, humanoid, pale, elongated, their movements jerky and unnatural. Every step I took felt guided, herded by an invisible force, pushing me deeper into the woods. The cabin loomed behind me like a black heart, radiating the energy of 100 years of fear. Then I saw the effigy again, or its likeness, standing silently among the trees, impossibly tall, watching, its smooth, featureless face glowing faintly in the fog. I realized then that the logging camp had not been abandoned. It had been claimed by something that thrived on intruders. And now I was part of its endless story of terror. I stumbled blindly through the snow, my breath freezing in the cold air. The fog thickened, and the trees warped into grotesque shapes, forming twisted corridors that seemed to shift as I moved. The whispers were now deafening, swirling around me, pulling at my thoughts. You cannot leave. Belong forever. Every instinct screamed to run, yet my legs felt weighted, as if the forest itself was holding me in place. The smaller figures began to emerge from the fog, pale and thin, their eyes hollow and unblinking. They moved in unison, circling me silently, cutting off any possible escape. The effigy, or something like it, stood on a small rise ahead, impossibly tall, watching me with an unseen awareness that pressed into my very soul. I realized then that I had been drawn here not by chance, but by something ancient, patient and hungry, feeding on the curiosity of anyone who dared enter its domain. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped. The snow beneath my boots felt alive, cold tendrils gripping at me, slowing my progress. My camera, still around my neck, felt heavier than ever, and I realized it had captured more than just images. It had captured attention, and attention was dangerous here. Panic set in fully as I realized I was surrounded. Every direction led only deeper into the fog and twisted trees. The whispers had become voices, each one distinct yet impossible to separate, calling my name, mocking my fear, commanding me to surrender. My boots sank into snow that seemed to resist my steps, slowing me, forcing me closer to the effigy and its smaller attendants. Then I saw movement in the trees above me. Branches bent unnaturally, twisting downward, and from them, more pale figures descended silently, gliding, crouching, merging with the fog around me. My heart raced uncontrollably. I could feel the weight of their gaze pressing into my skull, into my chest, into my very thoughts. The effigy's featureless face seemed to glow faintly through the mist, drawing me in, pulling my attention toward it despite the instinct to flee. I stumbled backward and fell, snow coating my face, breath freezing in my lungs. I realized that leaving was no longer a choice. The camp, the forest, and the effigy had claimed me for their story, and survival depended not just on speed, but on trickery, on finding some opening in the labyrinth of fear itself. Every instinct told me I was running out of time. By now, exhaustion and terror had merged into a single, paralyzing feeling. My lungs burned with every breath, my legs ached from running through deep snow, and my mind was on fire with panic. The effigy and its attendants seemed to move closer with every heartbeat, their pale forms materializing from the fog like shadows made flesh. The forest had warped completely. What had once been familiar paths were now endless, twisted corridors of ice, snow, and black pine. The whispers became commands I could not resist. You are ours. Stay. Belong. I could feel a pull toward the effigy, as if invisible threads were tugging at my very being. I struggled against it, each step forward a battle with both snow and the unseen forces guiding me. Occasionally, glimpses of the figures in the fog revealed faces, or what might have been faces, twisted in unnatural expressions, silent screams frozen in pale skin. A sudden movement to my left made me spin, and for the first time, I saw the true horror. Dozens of pale humanoid shapes emerging from the snow, all circling me, their forms jerking unnaturally, their presence oppressive and inescapable. I realized that leaving the forest alive would take more than speed. It would take cunning, luck, and perhaps a miracle. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I spotted a faint trail of light cutting through the fog. The remnants of the dirt road I had initially followed. Summoning every ounce of strength, I sprinted toward it, snow biting at my boots, branches clawing at my face. The whispers did not stop. They grew louder, a chorus of mockery and rage. But the pull of the effigy in the forest's grasp seemed to weaken with distance. I burst through the tree line and onto the road, just as the first faint light of dawn began to illuminate the snow. The fog retreated. The figures vanished, and the effigy's presence dissolved into shadow. My body shook uncontrollably, but I had survived. Yet even now, I cannot escape the feeling that the forest watches, waiting for the next intruder. The abandoned logging camp was never truly empty. It had a guardian, patient, ancient, and hungry. I left with my camera, but the images I captured revealed far more than I intended. Shapes that should not exist, eyes that followed, shadows that moved on their own. The abandoned logging camp remains a place I will never return to. A dark secret buried in Alberta's northern wilderness. Some places are meant to be left alone, and some stories are meant to terrify forever. My name is Marcus Bennett, and this happened during the summer of 2018. I had rented a small cabin on Red Pine Lake, a remote body of water in northern Alberta, hoping to escape the city and spend a week fishing and photographing wildlife. The lake was beautiful, framed by dark pine forests and jagged cliffs. But the first night I arrived, I noticed something strange. The water near the shore seemed to move unnaturally, rippling without wind, as if something beneath the surface was stirring. The cabin itself had been empty for years, yet as soon as I stepped inside, the air felt oppressively heavy, thick with the smell of damp wood and something metallic, faint but unmistakable. The floorboards groaned under my weight, but I could swear some of the creaks were not mine. Shadows stretched across the walls, darker than the night outside, shifting as if alive. I set up my camera and lantern, telling myself it was just nerves. But the moment I turned off the lights, the whispering began. At first, it was faint, almost inaudible, like the rustle of leaves. Then, a soft voice formed words I could barely comprehend. "You shouldn't be here. This is ours." My pulse jumped. But I stayed, trying to convince myself it was the wind, though every instinct screamed otherwise. The first night was restless. Every creak, every ripple, every shadow seemed amplified in the stillness. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of footsteps on the dock. Slow, deliberate, though I was alone. My heart pounded as I grabbed my flashlight, swinging it toward the source. The beam illuminated the water, dark and smooth, reflecting the pale moonlight. But there was nothing there. And yet, I could feel a presence, a heavy weight pressing down on my chest, keeping me rooted in place. Then I saw movement under the water, something massive gliding just beneath the surface. I tried to call out, but no sound came. The whispers returned, louder now, closer, as if carried on the wind across the lake. Leave. Leave. You will not take our home. My camera captured something faintly glowing beneath the dock, a shape too long and twisted to be a fish. I stayed awake for the rest of the night, listening. The lake itself seemed alive, breathing in sync with the whispers, stretching endlessly, harboring something ancient and deeply malevolent. By dawn, I realized the red pine lake I had admired in daylight was something entirely different at night. A predator waiting patiently for the next trespasser. That morning, I tried to convince myself that it had all been a nightmare. The lake looked calm in daylight, reflecting the sky like glass, and the forest seemed peaceful. But the sense of being watched did not fade. As I walked along the shoreline, I noticed strange markings in the sand, long, deep scratches, like claws dragged across the ground. They started at the dock and disappeared into the water, leading toward the darker, deeper parts of the lake. I returned to the cabin to check my camera. The night's footage showed more than I expected. Fleeting shapes beneath the water, humanoid but elongated and twisted, faces blurred and featureless, eyes glinting faintly. One frame showed a hand reaching up from the water, pale and unnaturally thin, only to vanish in the next. I felt a chill crawl over me as the whispers returned, carried now not just by the wind, but from within the cabin itself. You are not welcome. You cannot take what belongs to us. I tried to leave, but the lake seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction, the dock and cabin appearing closer in one moment and impossibly distant the next. Something was toying with my perception, bending the forest and water to its will. I realized then that Red Pine Lake was not just haunted. It was alive, predatory, and ancient, waiting for intruders to make one fatal mistake. That afternoon, I decided to investigate further. I borrowed a small rowboat I found tied to the dock, telling myself I needed evidence to understand what I was dealing with. As I rowed into the center of the lake, a sense of dread enveloped me, thick and suffocating, pressing against my chest like a physical weight. The water was unnaturally still, yet I could feel currents beneath, moving with intelligence, guiding me toward the deepest part of the lake. Then I saw it, a massive shadow, long and sinuous, moving beneath the surface just out of reach. It was too large to be a fish, too deliberate to be natural. My hands shook on the oars as the whispers escalated, now chanting in a rhythm that echoed through my mind. Return. Return. Leave what is ours. I tried to turn back, but the oars felt impossibly heavy, as if the water itself was resisting me. Shadows began rising along the edges of the boat, pale, elongated forms that watched me silently, their presence cold and overwhelming. Every instinct screamed to flee. Yet something held me in place, forcing me to confront the horrifying realization. Red Pine Lake did not want me to leave alive. Panic overtook me as I struggled to row back toward the dock. The water beneath me churned unnaturally, dark waves slapping against the boat like angry hands trying to pull me under. The elongated shapes in the water moved closer, circling the boat, and I could see pale, featureless faces shimmering beneath the surface. Each ripple made it appear as though dozens of eyes were staring directly at me, watching, judging, waiting for me to falter. The whispers had grown into a chorus, overlapping in a language I could not understand. Yet each word hammered into my skull with the clarity of a command. Belong. Belong. You cannot escape. I tried to shout, but my voice was swallowed by the cold wind and the oppressive weight of the lake. Every instinct screamed at me to fight, to escape. Yet the water seemed alive, manipulating me, bending reality, slowing my movements as if the lake itself wanted me to succumb. Finally, I reached the shallow water near the dock, stumbling out and collapsing onto the frozen, damp ground. I dared not look back, yet I could still feel it, the lake's presence, the awareness that I had intruded on something ancient, and that it had marked me. I had survived, for now. But the red pine lake would never forget me. Shaking, soaked, and exhausted, I stumbled back to the cabin, desperate to gather my things and leave. The whispers followed me, drifting from the lake into the cabin, curling around my mind with a malevolent patience that made me dizzy. The air inside the cabin had thickened, cold and heavy, and shadows clung to the corners like living things. Every creak of the floor sounded amplified, and I could swear that the small wooden effigy someone had left on the porch the night before had shifted slightly, its face oriented toward me, though featureless. I packed my gear quickly, refusing to take another photograph, ignoring the constant sensation of eyes on me. The lake glistened in the distance, deceptively calm, but I could feel the same predatory awareness I had experienced at night. As I loaded my truck, I glimpsed movement in the water. Shapes swimming just beneath the surface, larger than any human, elongated and pale, observing silently. I felt an icy chill and realized the lake had been watching me from the start, testing me, judging me, deciding whether I was worthy of survival. I drove away without looking back, the whispers fading, but not disappearing. Even miles from the cabin, I could feel them in my mind, a reminder that Red Pine Lake never forgets those who trespass. Even after leaving the cabin and putting miles between myself and Red Pine Lake, the feeling of being watched did not fade. Every reflective surface in my truck, mirrors, windows, even my phone screen, seemed to ripple with faint shadows, pale, elongated shapes that I could not explain. Sleep became impossible. Every time my eyes closed, I saw the lake, the dock, the boat, and those featureless faces staring up at me from the depths, as if waiting for me to return. I began to notice strange occurrences in everyday life. Water in my sink rippling unnaturally, shadows moving against the light, whispers in empty rooms. Friends dismissed my accounts as stress or overactive imagination, but the evidence was undeniable. I had photographs that clearly showed shapes beneath the water and movement that could not be explained naturally. It became clear that the lake had left a mark on me, a tether that connected me to its depths. The Red Pine Lake I had admired in daylight was a predator in disguise, and now it had extended its awareness beyond the water itself. I was no longer just a visitor. I was a target, observed, studied, and slowly being drawn back to a place I had no intention of returning to. Weeks passed, but the Red Pine Lake phenomenon did not fade. One evening, I reviewed my footage again and noticed something horrifying. The shapes in the water were moving closer to the dock in successive frames, as if aware of the camera, aware of me. The whispers had also returned in the recordings, soft at first, then loud, almost pleading. "Come back, belong, ours." My heart pounded as I realized that the lake was not confined to its physical boundaries. It was reaching out, extending its influence, its patience, and its malice. I became hyper-aware of any body of water, noticing shapes and shadows that weren't there before, feeling the same oppressive gaze I had felt on the lake. The Red Pine Lake entity, whatever it was, had followed me mentally, embedding itself in my perception, testing my fear, and feeding off my obsession. The isolation I had sought in nature had been replaced by a relentless psychological terror that I could not escape. Now, even writing this account, I feel the tug of that ancient presence in the recesses of my mind. The Red Pine Lake is more than a lake. It is a predator, a sentinel and a hunter that never forgets its intruders. By now, the psychological toll had become unbearable. Every reflection, every shadow, every ripple in water made me tense, fearing the return of those featureless, elongated figures. I could feel their presence pressing against my mind, as though Red Pine Lake itself had followed me, watching my every move. Even during the day, the lake haunted me in my memories, its waters seeming to move in ways that defied logic, the dock, the boat, and the forest stretching and twisting in my imagination. One night, I awoke to a soft splash outside my window. Heart hammering, I looked toward the pond near my new home, completely still in reality. But the shadows in the moonlight shifted unnaturally. I saw a faint glow beneath the surface, reminiscent of the lake itself, moving toward me slowly, deliberately, drawing my gaze in, testing my resolve. The whispers returned, now a chorus of voices, chanting, "Return, belong, ours." My pulse raced as I realized that Red Pine Lake had extended its reach beyond physical boundaries, its influence reaching into my mind, my perception, my fears. I understood then that some places are more than locations. They are entities, and Red Pine Lake had claimed a part of me forever. I have never returned to Red Pine Lake, yet its influence persists. Even now, years later, I can feel its tug in quiet moments. The faint sense of eyes on me, shape flickering in reflective surfaces, the distant whispering echoing in my mind. I realize that the lake is patient, slow, and eternal. It waits for curiosity, for intrusion, for fear. Those who visit its waters are tested, studied, and marked, whether they survive or not. The images I captured during my stay still haunt me. On some frames, the pale, elongated shapes appear closer than they should be, their blurred faces featureless but terrifyingly aware, as if watching me personally. The dock, the boat, the cabin, all appear subtly altered, slightly warped, as though the lake remembered every trespass and subtly distorted reality itself to punish or warn. Red Pine Lake is not just a place. It is a predator, ancient and cunning, patient and enduring. It haunts its visitors, follows them, and waits. I survived, but I am no longer free. And I know, in the deepest recesses of my mind, that one day it will call again, and I may not resist. My name is Elena Crawford, and this happened during the fall of 2019. I had been invited to spend a weekend at Whispering Pines, a secluded lodge in northern Alberta, by some friends who insisted it was the perfect escape from city life. The lodge sat deep in the forest, surrounded by towering pines that seemed to lean in closer as night fell, their shadows stretching unnaturally across the snow-covered ground. From the moment I arrived, something felt off. The air was too still, the silence too complete, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. The first night, I woke to faint whispers drifting through the trees, barely audible, like someone or something was moving just out of sight. I told myself it was the wind, though the shadows on the walls of my cabin seemed to flicker independently of the candlelight. My friends laughed when I mentioned it, claiming it was just nerves. But the unease did not fade. Later that night, I noticed footprints in the fresh snow outside my cabin. They were too large and elongated to belong to any human, spaced unevenly, as though whatever made them moved in jerky, unnatural steps. My stomach tightened as I realized that I was not alone. Something was watching us, waiting and moving silently among the trees, and it had already begun. As the night deepened, the whispers became louder, overlapping in a strange cadence that made my head spin. I peeked out the window and saw pale shapes moving between the trees, too thin and elongated to be human, gliding silently through the snow. My friends were asleep, oblivious, and I debated whether I should wake them or handle it myself. But instinct screamed that any sound might attract attention. I grabbed my camera and flashlight, intending to document the strange figures, hoping for proof. As I stepped outside, the cold hit me like a wall, and the forest seemed to shift subtly around me, the trees bending as if to block my path. The footprints led away from the lodge and deeper into the woods. I hesitated, but curiosity and fear pushed me forward. Suddenly, a whisper cut sharply through the air. "Do not follow. Leave now." My flashlight flickered, revealing a tall, featureless humanoid figure standing silently among the trees, its head tilting unnaturally toward me. Every instinct told me to run, but the figure did not move, only watching, patient and deliberate. I realized in that instant that Whispering Pines was not just remote. It was alive with something ancient and hungry, and it had chosen me as its next witness. I forced myself to breathe slowly, trying to calm the panic clawing at my chest. The pale figure remained motionless among the pines, its featureless face tilted slightly, observing every step I took. I realized that I was completely alone, my friends asleep inside the lodge, oblivious to the presence in the forest. The footprints continued deeper into the trees, and my curiosity, fueled by both terror and disbelief, pushed me forward. With each step, the forest seemed to shift around me, the trees bending in ways that defied natural physics, creating unnatural corridors that led me further into the darkness. Every crackle of snow underfoot echoed like a gunshot, and the whispers grew louder, overlapping into a chorus of unintelligible voices. "Stay. Belong. Ours." My flashlight flickered again, and in that brief moment of darkness, I could have sworn the figure had moved closer. Though it was impossible, it had not taken a single step. I snapped pictures, hoping for evidence, but the camera revealed even more than I expected. The figure appeared in multiple positions in the same frame, almost warping reality, and ghostly silhouettes emerged among the trees behind it, watching me. I realized that Whispering Pines did not just haunt the living. It could manipulate perception, bending space and time to trap intruders. Fear and adrenaline surged through me as I realized the forest was actively responding to my presence. Shadows shifted independently of the moonlight, branches arched unnaturally, and the snow beneath my feet seemed to resist my movements, slowing me down. The whispers had become coherent for brief moments. "You cannot leave. Join us forever." I shivered as the air thickened, the cold cutting deeper, carrying a metallic tang that made my stomach churn. Suddenly, movement to my left caught my attention. Another figure appeared, taller and more grotesque than the first, its limbs unnaturally long and its posture jerky, almost mechanical. My flashlight illuminated the nearest trees, revealing dozens of smaller, thin shapes weaving silently among the pines. Every instinct screamed for me to run, but the forest's layout had shifted completely. Paths I had taken earlier now twisted into dead ends, forcing me closer to the figures and the dense heart of the woods. I stumbled backward, nearly falling, and in that instant, realized that Whispering Pines was a living trap, a sentient forest that hunted those who dared enter. The lodge, the snow, the trees, and the pale figures all seemed to merge into one malevolent force, patient and relentless, waiting to claim its next victim. My heart raced as I realized that I had ventured too far into the forest. The figures were no longer stationary. They slid silently through the snow, moving with an unnatural grace, circling me with patience that made my skin crawl. Every direction I turned, seemed to lead me deeper into the darkness, the trees bending and twisting as if the forest itself were alive, herding me toward an unknown fate. The whispers grew louder, overlapping into a deafening chorus, sometimes pleading, sometimes commanding. Stay. Belong. Ours. I tried to shout, but my voice was swallowed by the oppressive silence that hung between the trees. My flashlight flickered again, and in that moment of darkness, I saw movement in the snow. Footprints forming as if the forest itself was shaping the path I was forced to take. The pale figures' faces remained featureless, yet their awareness was undeniable. Every instinct told me that escape was no longer guaranteed. I stumbled across a frozen stream, its surface cracked like glass, and caught a brief glimpse of the figure I had seen first night. Standing at the far bank, motionless, yet somehow closer than possible. I realized then that Whispering Pines was not just a haunted location. It was a predator, patient and eternal, feeding on fear and curiosity alike. I forced myself to keep moving, though every step felt heavier, as though the forest itself resisted my escape. The pale figures followed silently, circling, never approaching directly, but always aware, always watching. Their elongated forms flickering in and out of view like shadows given flesh. The whispers grew more insistent, invading my mind, repeating over and over. You cannot leave. Ours. Forever. Desperation clawed at me as I scrambled over a fallen tree, my camera swinging from my neck, catching fleeting glimpses of figures that should not exist. The forest seemed to twist reality. Pathways that had existed moments before now disappeared, replaced with dense undergrowth and looming pines that bent toward me. I realized I was being driven, manipulated, herded toward the very heart of Whispering Pines, the part of the forest no one dared enter, where those who disappeared were said to vanish for good. Suddenly, a branch snapped behind me, and I froze. Two of the pale figures had emerged unexpectedly close, their featureless faces tilted as if judging, testing me. My breath came in ragged gasps, and I knew that if I faltered, the forest would claim me, adding another name to its list of vanished visitors. Survival depended on cunning and speed, but more than anything, it depended on luck. By now, exhaustion and fear were fused into a single paralyzing force. My legs burned with every step through deep snow, my lungs gasped for air, and the forest seemed to close in around me, reshaping itself with every glance. The pale figures moved silently, circling and shifting without a sound, their presence a constant, inescapable pressure. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but the twisted forest made every path lead back toward the heart of Whispering Pines. The whispers now had rhythm, almost like a chant, echoing through my mind and bending reality. Return. Belong. Ours. Even the snow underfoot seemed to respond to the voices, forming unnatural patterns that guided me deeper, away from safety. I stumbled across a clearing, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw the lodge in the distance. But it was an illusion. The snow-covered trees formed walls that had not been there before, trapping me in the forest's maze. Panic and adrenaline surged together as I realized there was no straight path out. Whispering Pines was patient, ancient, and intelligent. It toyed with intruders, feeding on fear and despair. I understood then that the forest was alive, sentient, and waiting for its next victim, and my time was running out. I pressed forward, desperately searching for any sign of the lodge or an exit. But the forest continued to shift and warp, guiding me toward the unseen center of its domain. Shadows twisted unnaturally, stretching across the snow like reaching hands. and I caught glimpses of dozens of pale figures flitting among the pines, their long limbs jerking in unnatural, almost mechanical movements. The whispers became more insistent, echoing directly in my mind. Stay, join, belong. I stumbled across a frozen pond, its surface perfectly smooth, reflecting the pale moonlight. The figures surrounded it, standing silently, almost as if performing a ritual. My camera captured glimpses of ghostly faces and elongated shapes moving beneath the ice, watching me, waiting for me to make a wrong move. I realized then that the forest had been manipulating my perception, bending light and space to trap me in its labyrinthine heart. Fear and determination warred inside me. I knew I had to escape, or I would vanish like so many before me. But the deeper I went, the more the forest seemed alive, shaping itself, testing my resolve, and proving that Whispering Pines was not just a location. It was an ancient predator, patient and eternal. By now, desperation had completely taken over. Every shadow, every whisper, every shifting snowdrift felt like the forest itself was alive and breathing, aware of my every move. The pale figures no longer circled. They advanced slowly, methodically, their elongated forms moving with a precision that was impossible for any natural creature. My mind raced as I tried to find an escape, but the twisted pines created corridors that looped back on themselves, trapping me in a maze of snow and shadow. I stumbled again, almost collapsing, and in that moment, one of the figures glided right past me, silent, featureless, yet unmistakably aware of my presence. The whispers were deafening now, chanting, "Return, belong, forever." My camera flashed instinctively as I tried to document what I could, and the screen revealed something that froze my blood. Dozens of pale, elongated figures reflected not only on the snow, but within the snow itself, as if the forest had memories, recording every trespasser for eternity. I realized in that instant that the forest didn't just punish, it claimed. Every twist, every shifting tree, every shadow had been carefully orchestrated. My only chance of survival was to act on instinct, flee blindly, and hope the ancient predator that was Whispering Pines allowed me to escape. Finally, after what felt like hours, I saw a faint glow ahead. The lodge barely visible through the dense, warped trees. Every ounce of strength I had left drove me toward it, the whispers and shadows trailing me like spectral chains. As I neared the lodge, I realized that the figures did not pursue me beyond a certain point. They simply watched silently from the forest, bending the shadows, ensuring I would never forget what I had seen. I burst into the lodge, slamming the door behind me, gasping for air, trembling from exhaustion and terror. The warmth inside, though minimal, felt like salvation. Yet I could still hear faint whispers seeping from the forest. Return. Ours. Forever. My friends awoke, panicked by my wild account. But no matter how much I tried to explain, nothing could convey the living, malevolent intelligence that haunted every inch of Whispering Pines. Even now, years later, I cannot go near forests without feeling the same oppressive weight, the same cold awareness pressing against me. Whispering Pines is not just a forest. It is an entity, patient, sentient, and eternal. And it waits for those who dare enter its heart. Some disappear forever, and others, like me, are marked for life. My name is Marcus Halloway, and this happened during the winter of 2020. I had driven to Black Hollow, a tiny, almost forgotten settlement in northern Alberta, to photograph abandoned buildings for a photography project. The town was eerily quiet, the streets covered in frost, snow crunching under my boots with a haunting emptiness that set my nerves on edge. Every house I passed seemed abandoned, windows dark and lifeless, doors hanging crooked on rusted hinges. Something about the place felt wrong, like the air itself was pressing in, suffocating, watching. I checked into the small inn on the outskirts of town. The proprietor was a gaunt man with hollow eyes, his smile thin and unnatural. He warned me not to wander after sunset, muttering, "Some things here don't like attention." I laughed nervously, assuming he was joking. But the warning echoed in my mind long after I had unpacked my camera gear. That first night, as I wandered the streets to capture the eerie glow of the moon reflecting off frost-covered rooftops, I noticed movement in the shadows, fleeting glimpses of something tall, thin, and unnervingly still. Every instinct screamed to leave, but I was drawn to the quiet, desperate to document the forsaken town. I did not yet know that Black Hollow was far more alive than it should be, and far more dangerous than any abandoned settlement had the right to be. The first night grew worse. As I reviewed some shots on my camera, I noticed figures in the frames that I hadn't seen with my eyes. Tall, faceless silhouettes standing near abandoned homes, sometimes peering from doorways or lingering at street corners. I felt a chill crawl up my spine as I realized that these figures were not merely shadows. They seemed to move when I wasn't looking, creeping closer each time I glanced away. I tried to rationalize it. Tricks of light, frost on the lens, exhaustion. But the unease in my chest was real. Later, when I wandered near the old town square, I found footprints in the snow, enormous and elongated, leading into the darkness. Yet no one was visible. I followed them for a short distance before the instinct to survive overrode my curiosity, and I returned to the inn. That night, I awoke to soft scraping sounds outside my window. At first, I thought it was the wind, but the sound was too deliberate, like someone or something was pacing along the frozen streets. I peeked through the frost-covered glass and glimpsed a pale, elongated figure standing beneath a flickering streetlight, motionless, watching me. Black Hollow had noticed me, and I suddenly understood that the town itself was alive with an intelligence older than anyone could comprehend. The next morning, I tried to shake off the fear from the previous night. The town appeared harmless in daylight, the frost glinting off rooftops and the sun reflecting weakly on snow-covered streets. But the unease lingered. Every building I approached seemed to watch me, windows like dark, soulless eyes. Even the air felt thicker, heavier, as if the town itself breathed around me. I decided to explore the old church at the center of Black Hollow, a crumbling structure with a steeple that pierced the gray sky. Inside, the pews were coated in dust, and the walls bore strange symbols etched into the wood, unrecognizable but ominous. My camera captured more than I expected. Faint silhouettes in the shadows, standing where no one could physically exist. The sensation of being observed intensified with every step, the stillness almost screaming at me, warning me not to linger. When I left, I noticed footprints in the snow that hadn't been there before. Long, elongated, leading into the forest beyond the town. A chill ran through me as I realized the town itself seemed to draw people inward, shaping the paths they took. Black Hollow was no longer just a backdrop for my photography. It had become a predator, patient, silent, and waiting for the next soul foolish enough to linger. That evening, the town's silence became suffocating. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the shadows grew longer and more pronounced, stretching unnaturally across the streets and buildings. I felt eyes everywhere, invisible yet undeniably present, tracking my movements as I tried to take photos. The air thickened, carrying faint whispers, unintelligible at first, then forming a pattern. Stay. Forever. Ours. I wandered toward the abandoned general store, my camera in hand, hoping to document the strange occurrences. Inside, shelves were toppled and products decayed into dust. I caught movement in the corner of my eye, a tall, pale figure standing in the doorway, elongated limbs bending in ways that defied nature. My camera clicked instinctively, capturing the figure's impossible stance, its faceless gaze fixed on me. Panic surged as I realized I had wandered too far from the inn, and Black Hollow's streets had shifted. Paths I had walked earlier now led into dead ends, snow forming unnatural barriers. The town was alive, bending reality to ensure I could not leave easily. Every instinct screamed to run, yet the silent predator that was Black Hollow seemed to toy with me, patient and eternal, testing my fear and preparing me for the inevitable. As darkness fully fell over Black Hollow, my fear became almost tangible, pressing against my chest with every step. The streets, now dimly lit by flickering street lamps, seemed to twist and reshape themselves, forming corridors I'd never walked before. The shadows moved independently of any light source, curling like living tendrils, and the faint whispers grew louder, penetrating my mind. Stay, ours, forever. I stumbled into the old town cemetery, where gravestones jutted out of the snow like jagged teeth. Something about this place felt wrong. The graves were too neat, too deliberate, and the snow covering them had impressions that did not match human footprints. My camera caught movement in the corner of my vision. I turned to see a pale, faceless figure gliding silently between the tombstones, its limbs long and unnaturally flexible. Every instinct screamed to flee. Yet my curiosity pushed me forward. The whispers now formed coherent sentences, urging me to approach the center of the cemetery. A sudden gust of wind carried a metallic scent, and I realized with horror that Black Hollow was feeding on my fear, learning my patterns, testing my limits. The town itself was no longer just abandoned. It was a predator, ancient, patient, and waiting for its next victim to falter. I pressed on toward the center of the cemetery, heart hammering and every nerve screaming to retreat. The whispers were now deafening, overlapping into a chorus of voices that seemed to come from the ground, the tombstones, and the very air. The pale figures multiplied, emerging silently from behind gravestones, moving without sound, their featureless faces tilting unnaturally as they observed me. The snow beneath my feet seemed to resist my movement, almost as if the town itself were shaping my path, herding me toward some unseen fate. I reached a small clearing in the cemetery where the oldest tombstone stood, etched with symbols that mirrored the strange markings I had seen inside the abandoned church. The largest gravestone had a hollow indentation in its center, dark and inviting. I felt an irresistible pull toward it, as though Black Hollow itself was calling me to step closer, to surrender to its control. The air was thick with a metallic tang, and the shadows around me bent, creating figures where none could exist. I realized that the town was alive, sentient and ancient, feeding on fear and curiosity alike. Any wrong step, any moment of hesitation, and I would become just another name lost to Black Hollow's eternal silence. I felt the pull stronger now, a magnetic force dragging me toward the largest tombstone. The pale figures no longer lurked at the edges. They surrounded me, circling slowly, moving in perfect, deliberate synchrony. Their faceless heads tilted unnaturally, as if studying my fear, measuring my resolve. The whispers had evolved into a chant, repeating the same phrase over and over. Join, belong, forever. I stumbled backward, almost losing my balance in the snow, and the figures mirrored my movement, closing the distance without ever seeming to step. The forest surrounding the cemetery seemed to bend and warp, trees forming twisted arches and unnatural corridors, funneling me closer to the hollowed gravestone at the center. The metallic scent of blood and frost was overpowering, filling my lungs with every breath. For the first time, I realized that Black Hollow was not a place, but a predator, an intelligence older than the settlement itself. It could manipulate reality, shadows, and perception to ensure that anyone who wandered in would either succumb to fear or disappear entirely. Every step I took was being observed, recorded, and judged. Survival was no longer about speed. It was about tricking a force that had already decided I was prey. I forced myself to take a step back, testing the boundaries of the hollow circle around me. The figures shifted in unison, their elongated limbs bending in impossible angles, keeping me inside the invisible trap. The whispers pressed into my mind, each syllable like ice. Stay, join, ours. My breath came in ragged gasps, forming clouds in the frigid air, and I realized that any hesitation would be my last. Desperation drove me to sprint toward a path that seemed familiar, but the snow underfoot changed with every step, forming barriers and guiding me back toward the gravestone. The pale figures did not chase me. They simply watched, waiting for me to falter, knowing that the town itself would ensure my entrapment. Shadows twisted unnaturally, forming shapes that mimicked my movements and my own fears, reinforcing the sense that Black Hollow was alive, sentient, and infinitely patient. Every instinct screamed to leave, yet I was drawn forward toward the hollow center. I realized that Black Hollow did not need to kill. Fear was its weapon, and surrendering to the whispers was enough to trap someone forever. The town's malevolent presence was absolute, patiently waiting for its next victim to succumb completely. By the 9th hour of my ordeal, I was mentally and physically exhausted. The forest and cemetery around Black Hollow had completely warped into a labyrinth of snow, shadows, and whispers, and every step I took seemed predetermined, guided by the malevolent will of the town itself. The pale, faceless figures no longer needed to move. Their presence alone curved reality, bending the paths and controlling my movements. The whispers in my head now screamed in unison. You belong. Ours. Forever. I found myself at the base of the largest tombstone again, its hollow indentation glowing faintly in the moonlight. I stumbled closer, my hands trembling, realizing that the town had orchestrated every move, every choice I thought I had made, to bring me here. From the corners of my vision, shadows twisted into impossible shapes, and I glimpsed dozens of figures emerging from the warped forest, their elongated limbs bending in impossible angles, faceless heads tilting unnaturally as they watched. Panic surged through me, but amidst the fear, a sliver of determination sparked. I could not allow Black Hollow to consume me entirely. My camera, my only witness, became my weapon. I would document what no one else could believe. I knew that survival depended on outsmarting an ancient, sentient predator that had trapped countless souls before me. Summoning the last of my courage, I ran, ignoring the path the snow laid out for me. Every step felt like a battle against the town itself. Shadows twisted to block my way, pale figures flickered in and out of existence, and the whispers screamed relentlessly. The hollow tombstone glowed behind me, its light pulsating, almost breathing like a living heart, as if Black Hollow were aware that I had dared resist. Finally, through a combination of luck and sheer determination, I burst out of the cemetery and onto the main street. The town seemed normal again in the dim moonlight, the snow undisturbed except for my own footprints. The figures remained at the edges of my vision, silent and unmoving, as if the town was marking me, allowing me to leave, but ensuring I would never forget its presence. I fled into my car, heart hammering, and left Black Hollow behind, never daring to look back. Even now, years later, the memory lingers. Black Hollow is not just a town. It is a sentient predator, patient and eternal, feeding on fear and curiosity alike. Anyone who enters risks never leaving, and those who escape carry its mark forever. As the final shadows of these 7 horrifying tales fade, we are left with a single, undeniable truth. The small towns of Alberta are far more than they seem. From the ancient forests of whispering pines, where sentient trees and faceless predators lie in wait, to the silent, malevolent streets of Black Hollow, where reality bends and whispers echo endlessly. These stories remind us that true horror does not always roar. It watches, waits, and preys on our curiosity. Each encounter was told through the eyes of those who lived to recount it. Ordinary people who found themselves facing extraordinary terror. Abandoned cabins, hidden basements, mysterious disappearances, and figures that defy explanation. They are not the stuff of fiction or campfire tales. These are documented, chilling experiences, and they prove that darkness has many forms, some of which can follow you home long after you leave the scene. From the twisting forests and haunted cemeteries, to forgotten small-town streets and decaying lodges, tonight we have walked alongside fear itself. We have seen what it feels like to be hunted by places that are alive, ancient, and patient. We have felt the cold grip of suspense and dread, and we have glimpsed what lingers just beyond the edge of perception. If one thing remains, it is this: the world is far darker than we often realize, and curiosity can lead even the bravest into its depths. For those who venture too far into the shadows, there is no turning back. Keep your senses sharp, your courage intact, and your mind wary, because darkness always watches. Thanks for watching. This was Dark Fears.